Well, welcome guys. Today is day 2 in the morning, day 2 of End of Dragons, and in this video I wanted to produce a review of my biggest thoughts, most prominent observations from day 1. Now there's not going to be any spoilers in this at all. In fact, for the footage, I guess I'm going to be really careful and just sort of show you map exploration and so on. So don't worry, I'm not going to be putting any spoilers, and there will be a few of these reviews as the days go along, and I'll start to talk about story, like subject material, a bit later. But there are an awful lot of things that I think we can look at with the expansion, and I basically want to ask the question here in these early hours, is End of Dragons good? Does it live up to our expectations? So here's a collection of my biggest thoughts from day 1. Now, let's lay down. How much have I played? My progress on day 1 was almost 8 hours of gameplay solid before I stopped. In those 8 hours, how far did I get? I mean, one of the big questions with the Guild Wars expansion is always, is it even that long? Because Guild Wars expansions tend to feel a little bit short to me. Well, I have beaten the first strike, both the story mode and the 10-man mode. We'll talk about that in a moment. And I'm about 2/3 through the first map, I'd say. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but that's my general feeling there. I have not beaten the first map meta event or done any of the other meta events. I've not even been to any of the other maps in those 7.5-ish hours. And one of the reasons for that is because I do like to play these games very slow. I try to get as much detail as possible. I think you guys will have actually made more progress in those 7 hours. And namely, I'm even doing a thing with a self-imposed rule set right now where I won't use a mount until End of Dragons would unlock it for me. So I don't have a Raptor yet, and I don't have a Springer yet, and so I'm moving very slow, and I'm experiencing these maps at like a really big, epic scale. I'm kind of like giving myself a new player experience, if that makes sense. And I'm actually really enjoying the Metroidvania aspects of that, for what it's worth. A lot of times I'll find like a mastery point or a map completion objective that I can't do yet because I don't have the required mount or the required Jade Bot mastery or something, and that really does feel very cool. The other thing I'm doing is I'm unlocking my elite spec naturally, by the way, so I don't have my elite spec yet. I haven't got enough hero points just yet. Now, to be fair, you don't need my day 1 review here to know what I think about the elite specs. We've already had 4 betas for the elite specs. They haven't changed that much since, so I don't think we're missing out on too much there. I'm playing a previous elite spec right now, the Reaper, and I'm using the new stat set, Dragon Stats, which is a new attribute from the X-Pack, but really hasn't changed the gameplay in any way for me. I guess, as far as story is concerned, day 1, 7 hours, 8 hours, I think I'm about quarter of the way through, maybe slightly less, which is a good thing. I feel like I have a huge whole adventure left, and that's great. Even if you guys do play at a faster pace than me, which I expect you will, that feels quite lengthy to me, but it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict because this all depends on whether the story thins out a lot in the back half, like the previous 2 expansions did. Heart of Thorns really rushes in the second half, and POF has a whole section around the Desolation that's kind of missing too. So, did End of Dragons actually get a whole story without any thin parts? If it did, then this is a really impressive showing so far, but after day 1, I couldn't tell you. What I would say is for now, I'm really in that sweet spot for not just Guild Wars, but any RPG, where you're kind of really into it, and you've played a lot, you feel like you've played a lot, but it also feels like there's a potentially unending amount ahead too, and you know, you really feel like you're getting your money's worth. So that's about where I am. That's what's informed the opinions you're about to see. So let's get into them. The biggest things on my mind. First, I do want to talk about story presentation. Again, no spoilers. Don't worry, I won't give you any details about any characters. But let's talk about how they actually deliver the story. Now, here is the most positive I'm going to be in this whole video. I'll front load the positivity. This is the best story presentation we've had in Guild Wars so far. What do I mean by that? I mean that it's better than it was in Path of Fire. It's better than it was in Heart of Thorns. It's better than it was at Core in 2012. And I'm even going to go so far as to say it's better than it was in Season 4. Now, if you've played Season 4, you'll know it was really good back there. Yes, it kind of felt rushed in certain places, and you might not have agreed with some of the decisions they made in the story, like with the Joko stuff. But the way they actually presented it, you know, how much information you could get out of NPCs, how they used special actions, what they did with your movement, was all really good. Case in point, remember in Season 4 that scene at the end of the Thunderhead Keep release where you're staggering down the branded hallway, everyone's crying. I think we can all agree that scene was done really well. And what are they doing there? They're dynamically controlling your UI and like taking things off, applying that like black shaded effect to make you feel dazed and confused. They're actually taking focus of your camera to make you look at certain places and certain things at certain times. They're controlling your walking speed. They have your character stumble every now and then. It was a great short moment. Well, all that tech, all those ideas, they're back in End of Dragons. They feel perfected and they're constantly used here. There's another scene in Season 4 that I have a particularly high opinion of where you go into a jail with Zaim. End of Dragons kind of opens with a sequence very much like that. And they hit all the bars perfectly, and it's relentless. We've never actually had an expansion launch utilizing all these tools. Like, if you think about it, Season 4 was after POF. It was years ago now, so there's like another half a decade of development and stuff they learned even in the Icebrood Saga in terms of presentation that's all being applied now. You know, when you open this, you're going to find a bunch of cool flashy stuff, and eventually they'll pan out over the first map, and they even pop the big End of Dragons logo on screen. It's very good. The other real highlight that is beyond anything we've seen before are the cutscenes. So I've kind of always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with Guild Wars 2 cutscenes. I think they're really useful and they're good when they come up, but they tend to look grainy. I played the game at 1440p. The cutscenes are rendered at a lower resolution than that, a lower bit rate than that. They feel kind of ugly a lot of the time. In End of Dragons, it feels like there's been a quality bump on the cutscenes, but also the mocap and all the facial animations, the way that the characters move and interact is really good. This is definitely at a much better standard than what we've seen in the game before. I remember the really famous Joko cutscene from Season 4, and the devs were talking about how they took like 6 months to make it, and that was pretty good. I'm telling you, End of Dragons frequently pops new cutscenes up at you with character movements and stuff way better than the Joko cutscene. And they're really regular. I don't know how much we can expect this stuff to appear in Living World Season 6 or wherever the game goes after the launch of the expansion. But for the X-Pack itself, I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot more of those. They don't feel like goofy and like The Sims or kind of out of date anymore. They feel really, really well done. You can tell that a lot of new work and expertise has been put into that part of the game that just wasn't there before. Some other minor observations. There is a lot of voiced audio. They're doing that thing, again, a Season 4 innovation, where the audio isn't just randomly procking, it procs when you walk close by. And so, yeah, they have those holograms appearing that they talked about a lot in early access press, where you're getting news about the area of the world, and that changes based on how far into the story you've gone, which is nice. I actually noticed a few occasions, too, of totally missable dialogue in story instances, just from exploring and walking around to places you might not expect, which is, like, really rewarding to go that little bit deeper on an instance instead of just sort of spamming through it. And I like it, even if it does also make the completionist in me, who now realizes he might not get everything, a little bit nervy. There's also, and I like this too, a lot of choices about what order you tackle the story. In Guild Wars, it's very often like a beeline, you know, you just go here, then here, then here, then here, then here, and if you're lucky, they'll put like a mastery gate or something there and tell you to go play some meta events and get XP, or, you know, beat a heart or some dynamic events in the area and then return. Well, here, it feels like almost every moment of the story, they're saying to me, okay, you can speak to this guy on this island, or you can go speak to this guy in this monastery. These are both jobs you can and should want to do right now. And when you get that little bit of choice, you get a bit of a decision point there. It doesn't feel like one long beeline, it feels a little bit more explorative when you're going along the golden path. I would say not everything's perfect about how they're delivering the story. I've had a few disappointments. For example, there are a lot of NPCs around in the open world and stuff, but a disappointingly few of them you can actually press F on. Like, a lot of them have voiced dialogue, and that's great. But I also like being able to walk up to like a random citizen, press F, and see what they think about the world, or, you know, even if it's just a really minor little bit of dialogue. And they've essentially stripped and cut all of that out of this X-Pack. You know, if you're pressing F to speak on someone, it's because they're triggering a dynamic event, or because they're a heart vendor, or something like that. There's very few other ways to interact. If they do have some flavor for you and information about Cantha in the world, it was some lines of voice acting instead. And so you'll get this experience where you're in these really populated areas with a ton of NPCs around, but there's no interaction available at all. They're just kind of doing their thing and you glide on by. I wouldn't really notice this, except that in Core Guild Wars 2, in Heart of Thorns, and even POF to an extent, I think all those areas were much less stripped out. They were much better. And so now I'm really feeling it. Another thing POF did much better, I think, so far. Now, I might be wrong about this. It's only day 1. But it's like items and item flavor text. POF had all these amazing mouse over tooltips that really gave you this incredible sense of what the desert was like and the people who lived there. I've seen way less of that in Cantha, which is a shame. That was a real highlight of POF for me. But I can also imagine a lot of players don't look at those kind of details, so maybe that's an economical and correct decision for the studio. Unfortunately, ArenaNet is still struggling with a real pet peeve of mine, which is they're terrible at telegraphing what you can do with NPCs. Like, when you mouse over an NPC with your mouse cursor, if it turns into a chat bubble, generally speaking in the game, that has meant you can walk up, press F, and get extra detail. It's scattershot in End of Dragons. The mouse cursor will not give you any impression of what you can do. You're going to have to manually walk up to every NPC at every moment and press F just to see if maybe there's something you can do. This has been inconsistent the whole way through the game's lifespan, and I was hoping that another 5 years on since POF, this would be something that they've nailed, and they still haven't. It's a pretty minor thing, just a pet peeve. And what I have also noticed is in previous eras of the game, like Living World seasons, expansions themselves, once you beat a story instance, they would throw up a bunch of optional written dialogue so you can have chats with major characters and, like, you know, take stock of the situation, get more detail. But I would say in End of Dragons, that's really non-existent. You know, once the instance over, it's over. And maybe that's just a really savvy thing for ArenaNet to have done, because they've realized most player behavior involves people just skipping out of the instance instantly, so they don't see all of that dialogue, and instead they've shuffled it in elsewhere. But I can't help but feel a bit disappointed there as well. I finish an instance, and I want to run over to everyone and speak to them, but I'm not allowed to do that anymore, by and large. And we've had individual Living World episodes feel that way, especially crunched Living World episodes, but that's just par for the course in this 6-pack, which is a bit of a shame. Overall, I would just say there's a bit too little non-voice dialogue around. So those are my major thoughts about story presentation for now. I doubt they'll change much, because I kind of got a sense of how they're telling this story in this X-Pack. So we'll see what I think on day 2, day 3, and so on. Namely, if all this quality disappears in the second half of the expansion. But for now, I'm very impressed. The subject material itself, I'll talk about in a few more days when people are less leery about spoilers, and also when I have a more complete sense of the full story, because, I mean, they throw some stuff at you in this, and I need to see where it's going before I really have an opinion on it. Okay, so I have 2 big other topics. One of them is something I'm kind of upset about. The other is something I'm quite happy about. Let's do the one I'm kind of upset about. It's player population and its dynamic events and just generally how the maps feel. So let's be blunt about this. The expansion population and player activity in the maps feels really quiet. Like, while I was playing for 7, 8 of those hours, it was kind of like a ghost town in some ways. Now, don't get me wrong. The expansion is definitely not dead. Guild Wars 2 is not dead. There were clearly people logging on launch day. We, in just Spud, in our guild, had like 400 people online at once, alone, which is a big spike from normal. Like, when I would open the world map, I'd see everyone's yellow dots swarming all over the place. I could see how quickly people were progressing through the story and stuff and getting to the new maps. And at the very launch, you know, it was basically impossible to even see the story NPCs because of the hundreds of players standing around in insanely flashy armor, crowding them, and, you know, you just got to see what kind of a sneak peek you can get of Timey hidden in there somewhere, for example. But then, so the way I'm playing this X-Pack is very slow, very completionist. I want to do everything and really see what the devs made. So when I see a dynamic event, I go to play it. And I go to see how it's been implemented, get a real sense of that, like Guild Wars 2 launch, exploring Queensdale. Remember in some of the press, they were showing new innovations in dynamic events where you can carry crates around and they slow you, or you can use mounts to move stuff. I wanted to see this and see all the ways in which they've improved events. You know, there's an event to do with gardening at the start of this expansion that feels like a whole Renown Heart from launch. There's a Renown Heart where you're gardening a bunch in the Diessa Plateau, and that's like a cool event that you can do, doing some gardening right near the start of the expansion. So I'm playing this stuff, and here's the thing, nearly all the time, and I really do mean nearly all the time, there's no one around. Nobody's playing this stuff or doing it with me. The events scale, and I have to, like, solo them on launch day. It's only when, like, a guildie or a member of this WoodenPotatoes community specifically came to play with me that I had a sense I was, like, in an MMO when I was playing that content. The maps feel real quiet. Just the odd person walking around here or there, or, you know, clusters of AFK people in, you know, likely spots right where, you know, story instances might begin and stuff. So this isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I kind of liked the peaceful side of it. And Guild Wars, I would say, of all MMOs, is an MMO that doesn't require other people to get some enjoyment. But it was striking to me. So I think there's two major things going on with it. One is player behavior and how we as vets and the kind of people that would be there on launch day actually handle the game now. I think as Guild Wars 2 generally has a veteran audience at this point, especially considering this expansion is another thing that caters to Guild Wars 1 players or whatever. And when you take a bunch of players like that, people who aren't fresh blood, I think most people have realized that certain currencies and core systems just don't have value anymore. So they don't do certain things. So these random dynamic events like gardening or doing a random escort, I'm doing them because I love the game. I really want to see everything. An average player, well, the XP from dynamic events isn't that alluring. You get flooded with XP from other places. Like one of the first fishing masteries is like triple XP for you. The karma is basically meaningless to any veterans who have insane stockpiles of it and no real suggestion that there's going to be some great sinks in End of Dragons, right? And if there is, they haven't heard about them yet. Not to mention the fact that karma isn't even exclusive to events anymore. You can get it from tons of other places. The item rewards for the X-Pack, likewise, people aren't familiar with just yet. And besides, we'd probably have Legendary Armory getting filled in, so we don't need a bunch of the recipes. Or we can expect to be flooded with those rewards via meta participation instead of regular normal exploration. So, like, who's doing dynamic events? Regular players, they're just not going to be interested in it. They're going to want to go for the story. So that's what they do. And there's similar things going on with hero challenges. Nearly every player I saw right from the start of day one was already wearing their full new elite spec, just instantly dinged it. The fact is, everyone has a huge backlog of excess points they already had left over from earlier content, so they either get it straight up for free, or they do it via World versus World. And then that means that nobody's really doing the hero challenges. A quick sidebar, I do actually really like the way that they've done the hero challenge in this X-Pack. It's somewhere between POF and Heart of Thorns. POF, they were all super soloable and really easy. In Heart of Thorns, they were obviously quite difficult for the average players, so you had Zergs going around doing the hero challenge trains. In this X-Pack, they're like elite difficulty. So they're easy enough for me to solo, but they're like real fights, which is cool. And for inexperienced players, I think you will genuinely want a friend to do them. So this is a perfect example where the third game's expansion has found a balance between the previous two, and I'm really happy with it. But I think no one's talking about it because, again, everyone's just instantly unlocked their specs as it is. Then let's look at mastery points. Masteries, we get spammed with even through the main story and stuff, so why bother getting all of those ones out in the open world map? I already feel completely flush with them, but you know, maybe that's a criticism with the mastery system, not End of Dragons itself. What ends up happening is players are disproportionately just pushing through the story, something easy to do when the story is a really high quality like it is, and that means that they're either sequestered off into little single player instances, or they're not really exploring and doing random escorts, and the maps do not feel alive. That's one thing I think that's going on. The other thing that I think might be going on, and this is probably maybe even a bigger contributing factor, is mega servers. I think what might be happening here that's made the X-Pack feel a bit like a ghost town is that the devs have really throttled back on the max number of players can be on any one map. So what you have are these fairly large mount-oriented maps, just like Path of Fire started implementing, but with low player caps. So players are spread out over a lot of geography, and then there's not even that many of them on the map in the first place. Why would ArenaNet do this? Well, I think it's actually just to ensure a smooth launch. It was probably a tough decision if this is actually what's going on. But think about it, if there's a lower player cap per mega server, then there's a lower chance of players getting disconnected, better ping, less skill delay, higher frame rates in populated areas where, you know, tons of Zergs might be, and if you have bad culling settings, which, let's face it, a lot of people do, they don't know how to work with the graphics in the game, then they're going to say that the game's badly optimized. And what's especially on my mind is, like, event bugs and stuff. See, internally, ArenaNet can't stress test all these events and hero challenges with massive player populations. So in lots of other Guild Wars 2 major releases, you tend to find stuff like stalled or broken in some way because the team couldn't, you know, stress test at large scales. So by throttling player cap down, the live experience is going to become a lot closer to what they've internally verified, and things will work. So I think that's a part of it too, and it creates this weird thing where everyone wants to be excited about an MMO and lots of people around, but then the MMO feels really quiet. I don't know how big of a deal it is. I hope it doesn't give Guild Wars a bit of a weird or bad reputation, and it's kind of is extra disappointing to me in as much as, like, one of the biggest problems I've always had with Guild Wars is it feels like a single player game. It feels like an MMO trying to be a single player game, or a single player game, or just a game that forgot it's an MMO. End of Dragons has all these social ideas like fishing together and the skiffs, but so far it feels just as lonely and uninteractive with other players as any other Guild Wars 2 experience. You just see people around, but you don't really interact with them. I think I had one moment where I went out of my way to wave and emote at another player who was like a real player, not just a member of my own community. But we'll see, it's early days. Maybe that will change as things go forward. And that leads me nicely into the final big topic from day one, which was content I played cooperatively with other people. That was the strike mission. So I got far enough into the story to play the first big boss, which are now being repurposed as strikes. So this is repeatable 10-man stuff you can come back to later. And I did both versions. I won't give you footage or spoil what the bosses were. I'll just say that I did it. Now, this is the first of 4 strikes in the X-Pack. Assuming it's the easiest of them, I actually think it was really well balanced for average, normal, casual Guild Wars players. So we took 10 totally random people with totally random builds. Well, I say random, they were people from the WoodenPotatoes community, but you know, they weren't curated. They were random builds. We never looked at comp or anything like that. We never made sure we had the right boons and healing and all that. We for all I knew, were playing it without a goddamn support when we originally ran in there. And we wiped, which I was happy to see. I don't think you should one-shot this stuff with absolutely no prep on launch day where everyone's blind. We beat it in 4 attempts. It was about an hour of the day total. Across 4 attempts, we learned a little bit more about the fight each time. And after the 4th attempt, we beat it. And I actually think 4 attempts was the sweet spot. It was right around the time where I was getting a bit bored or stressed out about the idea of doing progression grinding for ages. And it was like, wow, there's this whole new game with this fun story and amazing environments to explore. Do I really want to be grinding this? And I was just starting to wonder if I wanted to do it. And then boom, we got it, and I felt really, really amazing. So I would describe it as Icebrood Saga level balancing. Now, you might not take that very well because people tend to have low opinions of the Icebrood Saga stuff. But what I mean is actually late Icebrood Saga when they were a bit better. I would say this was balanced around the difficulty of the Whisper of Jormag, which was the 2nd hardest one from the Icebrood Saga. I actually think the Bone Skinner was a way harder strike, and I'll explain why. If you take 10 random compless players, blind, i.e. no idea of the mechanics, into the Bone Skinner, they'll get absolutely destroyed over and over and over again, and they'll try to do the mechanics authentically, and it will take them a long time to do. This fight, by contrast, it was totally learnable, it was totally beatable, and there was better clarity here than what I've seen in most previous Guild Wars stuff, even including the full-on raids. And clarity is important. Clarity is where Guild Wars, like, difficult endgame, really struggles. And let me just be honest, I still don't think it's very good. ArenaNet still have a ton of work to do to become anywhere near as good as their market competitors. Like, if you look at Final Fantasy's Trials, which are like their equivalent of strikes, things are way, way better across the pond. ArenaNet have a lot to learn, but this was at least better, and we made tangible progress each time, and it was pretty fun. The rewards as well looked especially good. There's precursors you'll get for the new set of legendaries, which is obviously a really nice part of End of Dragons. Other expansions didn't have a whole new set of legendaries coming in at the time. There's an infinite combat tonic as a super rare drop. There's unique skins, ascendeds, good daily incentives. It was kind of a funny thing. The daily on day 1 was to beat the final strike, which would require insane rushing. I don't know how many people actually managed to get there. And don't forget as well, even though I'm saying, oh, I beat it in 4, that's really good, this is not the challenge mode version. That's the real analog to raids, the real challenging endgame, the proper prog stuff. That's coming in a couple of weeks as a post-patch. This is something everyone should be expected to do. And in that light, I think 4 attempts, again, it was the sweet spot. And I'm very excited to see the next strikes just because of how cinematic this one was. And if each one just is a little bit harder each time, I think they'll be good. Expect to find those in the later end of day reviews. So there you have it, guys. Those are the big topics. That's my conclusion for day 1. To answer the question in the title, is End of Dragons good? I think, yeah, for a Guild Wars expansion, it is a good expansion. For day 1, it exceeded my expectations for the main storyline. It exceeded my expectations for like map exploration and environments, which I wasn't, you know, I thought it looked pretty in the pre-release press, but it's a whole other ballgame when you're in there and playing it. And especially supplemented by such good voice acting and such a great story. So it exceeded my expectations there. It's about on par with the other expansions in basically all other respects. The masteries, you know, all I've done is a bit of fishing so far, which seems okay. Hopefully I'll have more opinions of it later. I haven't actually unlocked any other masteries yet, so I can't talk to you about skiffs and stuff. But generally, I would say everything else feels par for the course, which is good enough. I mean, I like Guild Wars. I'm a Guild Wars fan, so I'm having fun with it. Guild Wars always feels best when there's actually new content to play, and, well, we're in that phase right now. It's better than Living World because it doesn't run out in 2 hours either, you know, which is also really good. Oh, I'm going to just say, I love the taxi system. As someone who doesn't have mounts yet, so to speak, because I'm, you know, trying to play it as authentically as possible. The Raptor Taxis are really, really cool. So there you go. I won't linger with a massive outro. Video's long enough. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I'm off to play day 2. Keep an eye out on YouTube. I'm streaming all of this. I'm turning everything I do into a blind Let's Play. The more the merrier. You guys can check me out. I'm playing it slow, so if you're ahead of me, don't be scared about spoilers. You can come along. Just keep an eye out on my channel. I'll probably be going at it all day again. And we'll see where these opinions go as we move forward. I'd love to hear your day 1 takes down below, and I'll see you very soon. Thanks for watching, guys.